So this morning we are back in Acts, and we are back with the dynamic duo. So that's not Batman and Robin, not even Marg and Nigel. We are back with Paul and Barnabas, who are in modern day Turkey, where they visit a place called Lystra. And let's see what happens.
In Lystra, there sat a man who was lame. He had been that way from birth and had never walked. He listened to Paul as he was speaking. Paul looked directly at him, saw that he had faith to be healed, and called out, "Stand up on your feet." At that, the man jumped up and began to walk. When the crowd saw what Paul had done, they shouted in the Lycaonian language, "The gods have come down to us in human form." Barnabas they called Zeus, and Paul they called Hermes, because he was the chief speaker. The priest of Zeus, whose temple was just outside the city, brought bulls and wreaths to the city gates because he and the crowd wanted to offer sacrifices to them. But when the apostles Barnabas and Paul heard of this, they tore their clothes and rushed out into the crowd, shouting, "Friends, why are you doing this? We too are only human like you. We are bringing you good news, telling you to turn from these worthless things to the living God who made the heavens and the earth and the sea and everything in them. In the past, he let all nations go their own way, yet he has not left himself without testimony. He has shown kindness by giving you rain from heaven and crops in their seasons. He provides you with plenty of food and fills your hearts with joy." Even with these words, they had difficulty keeping the crowd from sacrificing to them. Then some Jews came from Antioch and Iconium and won the crowd over. They stoned Paul and dragged him outside the city, thinking he was dead. But after the disciples had gathered around him, he got up and went back into the city. The next day, he and Barnabas left for Derbe.
So firstly, we see Paul perform a miracle. As Paul and Barnabas enter the town of Lystra, they come across a man who has been lame from birth. Paul saw this man had faith, and because of that, he was healed. In verse 10, Paul says, "Stand up on your feet." And at that command, the man jumps up and begins to walk. Yet amazingly, this miracle isn't the focus of what then follows. The people of Lystra respond by claiming that Paul and Barnabas must be gods in human form. And they start speaking in their native tongue. And then it all gets a little bit confusing for Paul and Barnabas, and for us a little bit. Barnabas is labelled as the god Zeus, and Paul as Hermes. And then the priest of the temple of Zeus arrives with sacrifices to Paul and Barnabas to please them as gods in human form. And it's all a very strange reaction. But what we need to know about is the contextual reason of why the people of Lystra react like this. Well, in 8 AD, there was a Latin poet called Ovid, and he wrote 15 books of poems all about the myth of the creation of the world, and all the way through to Julius Caesar's time. And within this, one of the stories was set about Lystra. The story is that Zeus and Hermes took human form and disguised themselves. They came to the local land and visited 1,000 homes, all of which rejected hospitality to them. And eventually, an old poverty-ridden couple took them in. And in return, they gave great riches and rewards from the gods to this couple. And then a destructive flood destroyed the 1,000 homes that had rejected them. So this mythology is large in the minds of those living in Lystra. And therefore, when two men enter their town and perform a miracle, the people don't hesitate to take the opportunity to show hospitality and offer sacrifices to who they think are gods that have come amongst them. And you can imagine it takes Paul and Barnabas a moment to work out what's going on. The people have been speaking the native language, and only really when this priest arrives to sacrifice at Paul's feet do they realise the situation and respond with horror. They quickly realise that all they are being offered is not out of generosity or hospitality, but out of fear. The people are afraid of being struck down if they fail to lavish Paul and Barnabas, these gods with sacrificial gifts. Paul and Barnabas tear at their clothes, showing how distraught they are at the idea that people think they are gods, hoping to get attention so they can share the actual good news of Jesus. They want them to know the God that they have come to share, this true God that is very different to Zeus and Hermes. Instead of demanding to be entertained and offered hospitality on fear of death, they want them to know that it is God himself who is hospitable to us. When Paul preached in Antioch, he could refer to the Old Testament, the scriptures, the history, the prophecies, and law. But the pagans in Lystra did not know of this. And so Paul focused on the natural world around them, which they did know and could see. And he begs them to turn away from worshipping idols and turn to the true and living God. And he speaks of God as the creator of heaven, earth, and that they see everything in them. And he says, he has not left himself without testimony. He has shown you kindness by giving you rain from heaven and crops in their season. He provided you with plenty of food and fills your heart with joy. But despite their message of a loving God, Paul's message seemed too much for the Lystrans to accept. Soon some Jews came from Antioch and won the crowd over. They stoned Paul and dragged him outside the city, thinking he was dead. And I wonder why the locals reacted in this way. It seems that sometimes the good news of Jesus offends people because it is so radically different to how they expect or what they want the world to work like. Being given something for nothing, the definition of grace, it is sometimes too hard for people to accept. People like to feel that they have earned something, even God's love. Because if we earn God's love, we can feel justified in keeping it for ourselves. But God's love, God's gift is a gift, freely given, freely received. And our only job, therefore, is to simply accept God's loving kindness to us. Matt spoke last Sunday in the series of values we're adopting as a church, and he spoke on kindness. It's online if you want to listen. Once we accept God's loving kindness to us, it will transform our hearts and enable us to treat other people with the same unconditional love that God gives us.